When you say OCD, people often refer lightly to having a bit of OCD. They naturally assume that it's about contamination and hand washing and all of that, but they don't look at a sort of white middle-class woman with anorexia and think, wow, she's worried she's abusing children. It doesn't tally with media portrayal of these illnesses, and they're not Hollywood, they're not what you see in movies. So you live in this slightly separate world almost, whilst being really, really aware how irrational it is, which can kind of make it worse because you're so desperate. I'm so desperate to conceal the fact that I have these irrational thoughts. I think it really came to a head when I was 14, when I was abused at a party, one of these teenager parties, and I managed to get away, but I didn't tell anybody for so long with all the shame, and it rapidly became, I was totally obsessed with the fear of contracting HIV, which was sort of big in the news at the time. The sorts of OCD that I've experienced myself have been twofold in that there's the very overt behavioural OCD, which is very televisual, if you like, and you see it in the movies, and just all about having things exactly in order and counting and checking and cleanliness. Whereas for me, there's always been a much darker side of my OCD, which is more covert, and they call that pure OCD, that people don't see, and it's having a lot of taboo thoughts about harming vulnerable people, children, and they're very upsetting, and it's sort of, they're the worst things I can imagine, killing people. You put a weight on those thoughts and you think, well, I must be having them for a reason, and there's no thought without action. You sort of grow up thinking, I'm abnormal, or I'm dirty. I think that's a big reason why I avoid public transport, or have done in the past, because it's much easier when you don't have to think about the germs of touching things or sitting too close to somebody with vulnerability, or people looking at you in a certain way, and you can jump to conclusions and think, well, what's wrong with my face? And they might just be staring into space. I just don't like that at all, and it makes me really anxious. When I developed all the fears around contamination and HIV, and I found that, you think of the ways that you can control your environment. My parents were separating, there's a lot of exam pressure, There's a lot of stuff I was not in control of at that time. And I found I could control my food. And then I lost a lot of weight through doing that. And then the OCD and the anorexia became very entwined, and it felt very empowering to lose weight. My door routine, as I call it, is a behavioural thing that I do to neutralise some of the negative, intrusive thoughts that I have about particularly hurting my cats, or harm coming to my cats. And so I've got into this routine of having to put my feet in a certain order, a certain place. One of the hardest things, every day when I do my door routine is this simultaneous thinking that, look at me, this is so crazy, why am I doing this? Why am I wasting my time doing this? Which kind of makes doing it even harder and worse, because simultaneously you're having the strongest feelings that I must do these things, and if I don't, then bad things will happen. Shopping's a real challenge. Choosing things off the shelf, can never pick the first one, have to make a decision based on the thoughts that come into my head at that time, whether that's the wrong lime or the right banana or whatever it happens to be. They're very quick fire. It will be very spontaneous. The thoughts just roll. As with many things I do, with the cycling, cooking, in a way they help me overcome the issues that I have, because with chefing you can't stop and think, am I doing this right, before you serve a customer? You know, so I think both those things I find quite soothing and cathartic, and they help me challenge. They can be really difficult, but sometimes when you just have to do those things, these things can be helpful just as they can be challenging. I think it's really important that these things are discussed, that it is such a... And they change, you know, things can change over the years and become worse at one time and better at another, and there are so many life triggers that might make things pop up in different ways.